If you look at the modern world, its laws, its cities, its roads, its political systems, you are not looking at something entirely new. You are looking at echoes of Rome. At its height, the Roman Empire stretched across 3 continents, from the misty edges of Britain to the deserts of Egypt, from the Rhine and Danube frontiers to the eastern cities of Asia Minor, the Mediterranean Sea. Once a dividing line between civilizations, became a Roman-controlled interior space, what they called Mare Nostrum, RC. But Rome was not simply a vast empire built by conquest. It was something more unusual, a system, a carefully constructed structure of law, administration, military organization, economic integration, and urban culture that allowed a single political center to control an enormous and diverse world for centuries. And yet, despite its strength, Rome in the West eventually collapsed. So the question is not simply how Rome rose. The real question is, how did Rome function for so long, and why did it eventually fail? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. Rome did not begin as an empire. It began as a republic, a political system built on a fragile balance of power between elected magistrates, aristocratic families, and the Senate, an institution meant to prevent any single individual from dominating the state. For centuries, this system worked well enough for a small city-state on the Italian peninsula. But expansion changed everything. As Rome conquered Italy, then Carthage, then Greece, then the entire Mediterranean world, it created something the Republic was never designed to handle, a permanent global military machine. Armies that once served as temporary citizen militias became long-term professional forces. And more importantly, they became personally loyal, not to Rome itself, but to their generals. The shift quietly destabilized the Republic. Whoever controlled the army could control politics. By the 1st century BCE, Rome entered a cycle of civil wars. Figures like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Julius Caesar emerged not just as politicians, but as warlords commanding loyal armies. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, he did more than violate a political boundary. He triggered the collapse of the Republic itself. Civil war followed. The Senate fractured, armies marched against Rome, and when Caesar was eventually assassinated in 44 BCE, his death did not restore the Republic. Instead, it unleashed another round of conflict, one that would determine the future of Rome. Out of that chaos emerged a young man who would fundamentally reshape the Roman world, Octavian, later known as Augustus. Octavian understood something his rivals did not. Rome could no longer function as a republic in practice, but the idea of the republic still mattered deeply to its elites. So instead of destroying it openly, he preserved its appearance while changing its substance. In 27 BCE, he formally restored the republic to the Senate. In reality, he concentrated control over the military, taxation, and provinces into his own hands. He became princeps, first citizen, rather than king or dictator. This was the beginning of the Roman Empire in its mature form. The Principate, a monarchy disguised as a republic. Under Augustus, Rome stabilized, civil wars ended, borders were secured, administration was reorganized. The empire entered a long phase of relative peace and expansion, known later as the Pax Romana. For nearly 2 centuries, the Mediterranean world experienced an unusual level of stability. Trade expanded, cities grew, infrastructure spread. But more importantly, Rome developed something rare in the ancient world, a scalable system of governance. Local cities were allowed to manage internal affairs, as long as they paid taxes and remained loyal. Elites from conquered regions were gradually absorbed into Roman identity. Over time, Rome stopped being just a city. It became a political framework. At the center of Roman power stood its military system. The Roman army was not just an instrument of war, it was an institution of integration. By the early empire, soldiers served as professionals for roughly 20 years. After service, They received land, money, or citizenship privileges. This created a powerful incentive structure that sustained loyalty. The army itself was divided into three major components: the legions, composed of Roman citizens and heavy infantry; the auxiliaries, recruited from non-citizens across the provinces; and the navy, responsible for securing maritime trade routes and transporting troops. At its peak, the empire maintained roughly 300,000 to 400,000 soldiers. This was not a massive army by modern standards, but it was highly disciplined, standardized, and strategically deployed across a vast frontier system. Roman borders were not walls in the modern sense. They were managed zones, fortified lines, river defenses, and military bases integrated with local economies. In many regions, the army was the first and most permanent expression of Roman authority. Where soldiers went, Roman administration followed. Rome ruled not through direct micromanagement, but through a layered system of provinces. Each conquered territory was reorganized into a province after census mapping and taxation systems were established. Governors were appointed to oversee these regions. Some were elected magistrates, others were imperial officials directly accountable to the emperor. Their power was limited by structure. They had small staffs and often relied on local elites and existing city networks to function. The Roman Empire, therefore, was not a centralized bureaucracy in the modern sense. It was a hybrid system, combining centralized authority with local autonomy. This structure allowed it to govern enormous diversity. Latin dominated in the West, Greek in the East. Local laws often remained in place, as long as they did not contradict Roman authority. Over time, Roman law became a unifying framework. In 212 CE, a turning point came when nearly all free inhabitants of the empire were granted Roman citizenship. This was not just symbolic, it unified legal identity across the empire. A farmer in Spain and a merchant in Syria could, in theory, be subject to the same legal principles. Rome had become a legal civilization. The Roman economy was not capitalist in the modern sense, but it was highly monetized. Coins circulated widely across the empire, gold, silver, and bronze forming a structured monetary system. This allowed prices, wages, and taxes to be standardized across vast distances. Trade networks connected regions that had never been economically integrated before. Egypt exported grain to Rome, Spain produced metals, Gaul and Italy produced wine and manufactured goods. Luxury items flowed in from India and, indirectly, from China via long trade routes. The state played a central role in this system. Military supply contracts, taxation, and grain distribution created a predictable economic backbone. However, wealth distribution remained extremely unequal. A small elite controlled vast estates and urban wealth, while the majority of the population lived near subsistence. Still, compared to earlier societies, the Roman world was unusually interconnected and economically dynamic. Roman cities were densely populated, chaotic, and highly stratified. The wealthy lived in large houses with courtyards, gardens, and private baths. The poor lived in multi-story apartment buildings, insulae, often overcrowded and unsafe. All classes shared access to public life. Bathhouses were central social institutions, combining hygiene, leisure, and political networking. Amphitheaters and circuses hosted mass entertainment events, gladiator fights, chariot races, and public spectacles. These were not merely entertainment, they were tools of social cohesion. The Roman state understood something fundamental. A population that is fed, entertained, and integrated is less likely to revolt. This is where the phrase bread and circuses originates. It was not propaganda in the modern sense, it was a governing strategy. For nearly 2 centuries, the Roman Empire maintained a fragile equilibrium, a balance between military power, economic flow, and administrative control. But by the late 2nd century, that balance began to weaken. The first cracks appeared not as a single collapse, but as a slow accumulation of pressure. Border wars became more frequent. Germanic tribes along the Rhine and Danube grew more organized and more aggressive. In the east, the Sassanid Persian Empire emerged as a powerful rival, capable of directly challenging Roman authority in Mesopotamia and Syria. At the same time, something even more destabilizing was happening inside the empire. Political instability at the top. Emperors no longer ruled for decades, they ruled for years, sometimes months, and increasingly, emperors were not chosen through institutional continuity, but through military force. The army had become not just the foundation of imperial power, but its kingmaker. This created a cycle of violence. Generals proclaimed themselves emperor, civil war followed, one regime collapsed into the next. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome entered what historians later called the crisis of the 3rd century. This was not a single event. It was a systemic breakdown. Over roughly 50 years, the Roman Empire faced simultaneous shocks, continuous civil wars, invasions across multiple frontiers, economic inflation, and currency debasement, plague outbreaks that reduced population and manpower. Entire provinces broke away from central control. In the west, a separate Gallic empire emerged, controlling Gaul, Britain, and Spain. In the east, the city of Palmyra briefly created its own independent state. For a moment, the Roman world stopped being one empire. It became several competing fragments. Trade networks weakened. Coinage lost value as silver content was reduced repeatedly to fund military expenses. Trust in currency declined. Governors acted independently. Local armies followed local leaders. The imperial system had not just weakened, it had begun to disintegrate into its component parts, and yet Rome did not fully collapse. Instead, it adapted.